Hello and welcome to the effects of gravity on the edge. I could just as easily have said, welcome to skydiving on the edge, because what we have here is the Bestech Freefall. So a Bestech and Jason Clark collaboration, Jason Clark design. So reading up a little bit about him, a full-time knife maker, was a law enforcement officer, a state trooper, and later worked in the Inspector General's office, and around 2018 started making knives full-time. So looking at what he has to say on his website, says that he is a family-orientated man and also openly declares his faith. He is a Christian, good man, and you can actually see that in the maker's mark, the designer's mark. So there is the Jason Clark designer's or design logo neatly done on the blade of the knife. Also looking at what he has to say on his website and how he approaches producing knives. So the knives are produced 100% in-house, and this is custom knives, obviously, including designing, cutting, the shaping, grinding, heat treat, everything done in-house. Right, so let's get back to this, the Bestech collaboration. So, guys, now I'm going to be doing the usual. We'll go through materials, dimensions, and weight, and then dive into design and attributes of the knife. So let's get cracking. Blade, we have S35VN, the handle, and that's quite a complex construction on this handle. So we have titanium bolsters, we've got G10 scales on the rest of the handle, then we've got titanium liners, and then the rest of the hardware pretty much titanium. So we've got a titanium backspacer, titanium clip, the little torque screws are also titanium, and then interesting construction on the pivot assembly as well. So we've got the ceramic ball bearings, but we also have steel washers. Right, I think that's all the materials. Let's go through dimensions and weight. So blade length, we have 68.5 millimeters, and that's 2.7 inches. Blade thickness is 3.1 millimeters, and that's 0.12 inches. Handle thickness is 140. Handle thickness is 14.1 millimeters, 141 mils. Wouldn't that be something? That is 0.55 inches. Closed length of the knife is 94 millimeters, and that is 3.7 inches. And then overall length of the knife is 162.5 millimeters, and that is 6.39 inches. And unusually, I do not have manufacturer's stated weights, and that's because I can't find a Bestech a Bestech website. Weirdly enough, that's what I wanted to get out there. My mouth doesn't always do what my brain tells it to. So let's get that on and cranked up. Right, let's see what that looks like in grams, and that is 80 grams, so quite a light knife this, and that is 2.8 ounces. So you will have seen generally what the knife looked like in my hands, and the stated dimensions, or the dimensions that I gave. They're not stated, those are measurements that I did myself. So there we go. That it is not a very big knife. So I think one of those knives that firmly falls into that gentleman's carry type category of knife. So let's have a look at this knife, and it is, in my eye, a very handsome knife. A little bit odd in some ways, but certainly in its open position, I think a very, very good looking knife. I did notice in its closed position, when you hold it sort of at that angle, looking at it sort of side on, but perpendicular, vertical, or whatever it is. So the knife does remind me of something. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, and then it clicked. It reminds me of Salacious B. Crumb. Who is Salacious B. Crumb? Well, that's Jabba the Hutt's pet. And it's those ears. It's these weird sort of ears that appears to have in its closed position. But anyway, maybe that's just me. But certainly in its open position, I think a very handsome looking knife. Right, so let's speak about blade shape. So we've got a drop point blade, and it is flat grind, and you can see a massive swedge running along the spine of the blade, and then these two massive finger choils as well. Maybe not massive, but massive in terms of scale in proportion to the rest of the knife, perhaps. But that finger choil on the behind the edge of the blade obviously acts as a sharpening choil as well, so easy enough to keep the edge neat and tidy. And speaking of neat and tidy, the edge on this knife out of the box, very neat and tidy and uniform, and it was very sharp out of the box as well. And do I need to even say it? The blade finish, obviously, in this particular instance is in two-tone. So the main grind and that swedge is finished in a beautifully done black stone wash, and that really does look good. And in the flats of the blade, and the flats I'm talking about on those, oh, what are they? Are they flipper tabs or maybe hand guards in this particular instance? But those have a satin finish, and the contrast between that and the black stone wash really does look good. So that ricasso, you can see, sort of follows the shape of the front of the handle of that bolster and then stretches forward, tapers off to a fine tip, a fine point on the ricasso, and that ricasso separating then your main grind and that big swedge along the back. And where that does form that little tip, that's where your main grind and swedge then meet, and that forms a little ridge that is also just very beautifully done. That little ridge that gently curves up to the tip of the blade. So the blade, very, very interesting. Both that makes it interesting, and these sort of symmetric choils on the spine and front of the blade, or just behind the the edge of the blade, as I said. So that does look very good in my eye. I think that does make the blade look very handsome. It's almost, if you look at the knife like this, it's almost got that dagger look to it, you know, and it's these hand guards that give it that look, and those big choils give it sort of a dagger look, or maybe a switchblade look to it. But I do think that in its open position, the knife is very, very handsome, very good looking. The spine of the blade pretty squared off, and you can see where it tapers off to the tip of the blade. So quite a stabby blade, this. Right, let's just look at a little bit at those two flippers, or whatever you want to call them in a knife design like this. So the one on this side is a traditional flipper, and I'll speak a little bit about deployment of the blade as well, and some of the weirdness about it when you get the knife in hand. But a little bit of jimping on the flipper tab on that one, and this more the finger protection, I suppose, and there's no jimping on that one. Handle shape, so quite a sort of squared off shape, although you do have these finger choils where your finger does go, your fingers do go on the handle, and that carries on that theme of the finger choils that are on the blade as well. So I think that also very good looking. Spine of the blade pretty straight, no drop to this blade. Right at the end we've got this little bit of an angle down, but no drop to the actual handle there. And the handle itself around the edges not rounded either, so pretty square and sort of almost brick-like. No beveling and no rounding to that. A little bit of beveling there where on those finger choils on the handle. The finish on that bolster, beautifully done as well. So we've got a black stone wash in this particular case, and I'll speak about the other versions of the knife in a second. But the black stone wash to match the black stone wash finish on the blade, that really does look good on those bolsters. And interesting as well is that you will not see the pivot from the outside of this. So those bolsters covering up the pivot or pivot caps that lay beyond underneath that. So that also lends, adds to that sort of neat and I think handsome and good looking feel and look to the knife from an aesthetic perspective. The rest of the handle then is the G10, and in this particular case also I think really good looking. I think a good choice. The color finishes and general finishes in the range, I think this is a really good choice, and this is the orange and black version of it, and those sort of swirls in that G10 to my eye looks a little bit like a topographical map. And you can see a little bit of profiling, a little bit of shaping to that G10 scale as well. So if I get it at a bit of an angle, you can see sort of those little waves in it that also just adds something to the general aesthetics of the knife. I really do think that this is a very good looking knife, even in its weirdness. Right, what else have we not looked at? Let's look at that pocket clip. So we've got very deep carry and right hand only. So you can see that the pocket clip has been a little countersunk, the way it's mounted, countersunk into the scales, into the G10 scales. And it is sort of a wraparound, it's kind of a pen, one of those pen style pocket clips. So it is milled titanium, but it is very springy, and there is quite a bit of space behind that paper clip behind the clip, pocket clip, right? And the shape of it is very, very neat and understated. I think it suits the aesthetics of the knife as well. But as I said, it is not reversible, so tip up, right hand only. The liners I mentioned are titanium, and those liners have been quite heavily milled and skeletonized. So I'm going to pull the torch in here and see if we can just look inside there so that you can see that. And you can see, so this is on the lock side. You can see, just get this torch a little bit there, so it's less reflective. So you can see inside there that has been heavily skeletonized, and that on both sides. So on the show side as well, a lot of titanium removed to make the knife lighter. Right, the titanium liner lock in this case, and normally where you'd have a stainless steel liner, so this is a liner lock knife, but you can see the liner lock, traditional, nothing unusual there, and it does have the little stainless steel insert, so you do have stainless steel on stainless steel lockup, so you're not going to get any lock stick there. Right, what else? Let's get the knife in hand, and this is where the weirdness starts coming in. So when I get my hands behind those, and I'm going to call them now hand guards, when the knife is open, when the blade is open, you can see that it is a pretty small knife when you get your hand wrapped around that area behind those hand guards, and it's sort of a 3.5 finger. You can see my small finger starting to fall off the back of that handle, but pretty comfortable, and that's probably a little bit to do with the thickness of the handle as well. That is pretty comfortable. It's when you want to choke up on the blade that this becomes a little bit weird. So you try and make use of those forward finger choils, and then these two tabs, hand guards, whatever you want to call them, are very, very sharp edged. So the little edges there and there are sharp, but the edges around the sort of outside, around those edges are also very, very sharp. So it's kind of uncomfortable. You sort of have to manipulate and move your fingers around that and kind of get it in that position to use it comfortably, and then that doesn't feel very practical. So messing around with the knife a little bit, for me, it's more comfortable to hold this knife like you would a table knife or a steak knife, and that's to kind of get the knife in your hand like that, and then those don't come into play. Those tabs or hand guards don't come into play. And then if you want to choke up on the blade, you can then get your forefinger into that choil sort of like that, or get it onto the spine of the blade like that and use it more like that. And then that is pretty comfortable. And then getting back on the handle, like I say, that is comfortable. So it's a sort of knife that you probably wouldn't choose because it is the most practical knife, not necessarily the best user EDC type knife. You probably would buy this more as an occasional use and more for the aesthetics, just to have in the collection. And that's the sort of attraction that it has to me. I do have those knives that are very practical and that I will use as EDCs and that are sort of more users. And I do find this knife a little bit tempting, and it's about the aesthetics, and it's about the fact that it is something a bit different, and I'm glad that things like this exist, where guys do try something a little different, and it's, not just another knife that is the same as all the others. And I think that is what is nice about that knife. And again, I'm going to speak about the fact that in my eye, the knife, especially in its open position, is very good looking. Right, guys, have I covered off everything on the knife in general? I think I have. Maybe didn't mention the backspacer. So we've got the titanium backspacer, very plain, nothing ornate or unusual happening there. And you also do not have a lanyard hole on this knife. Let's speak a bit about the action. So buttery smooth the action. So if you move it slowly, and it's sort of what you would expect with that construction of the ceramic ball bearings and the steel washers, but that is really buttery smooth. And so deployment of the blade, you can make use of the traditional flipper tab, the one that's at the back on the spine of the handle now, and get hold of that, and the blade flies out. And And then you can make use of this other handguard. Now I'm going to call that the handguard, and I'm going to call that the flipper, or maybe this is a front flipper if you see what I'm going to be doing with the knife now. So you can get the knife in your hand like that. Make sure that your finger is out of the way of that little relief, that little bit of shaping on the liner there, because that's where that flipper now is going to move through. So make sure your finger's out of the way of that. Get your thumb in the front of that, in inverted commas, front flipper, and you can flick the knife out like that as well. So a little bit of a fidget toy, this as well, an unusual fidget toy. And then I have been able to, once or twice, get my middle finger under that, and you can make sure that I get my fingers on this side out of the way of the blade. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it now, but I have been able to, on the odd occasion, sort of spidey flick this, and now because I failed, I'm sort of determined to do it. There we go. So you can actually, with a bit of practice, you can weirdly spidey flick this knife as well. So as I say, a little bit of a fidget toy, so more than one way to deploy the knife, and that's pretty cool and interesting as well about this knife. Right, I think I've covered off most things, or maybe not. So just having a look at that liner lock. So the little relief cut is on the outside, so against the scale in this particular case, when normally you would probably expect it to be on the outside. That'll make it a little bit tricky to get some fluff and all that sort of thing, which is bound to get stuck in there. But it is torque screws on this, so easy enough to take the knife apart if you do want to give it a deep clean. Right, guys, let me, before I forget, just lay this down. So this knife did not come from my usual place. It did come from Blades and Triggers, though. So once again, I do appreciate their support, their ongoing support of the channel. So I normally get my knives from the Eastgate branch. And in this particular case, I got my fix from the East Rand branch of Blades and Triggers. So Muzza, thanks very much for hooking me up. So check out this and other Bestech knives and other brands of knives and other tactical goodies at Blades and Triggers, and you can see that on their website, BNT Online. Because I think that just leaves me to do size comparisons, and I just want to speak about this now. I've seen a few people complain about the thickness of the knife. I can get people sort of not sure about, you know, this weirdness here and how you can grab it, but as I've showed you, I think you can work around that. But I've seen people complain about the thickness of the handle as well, and frankly, rubbish. You know, they say it's sort of too thick to be a gentleman's carry. And well, how tight are your jeans and pants if you can't get this into your pocket? Maybe you should get a bigger size pants. Anyway, that's my opinion anyway. Right, so, and to prove my point, let's lay this down now and get back on track and get onto the size comparison. So I've brought this knife in, clearly a gentleman's carry, and this is the Benchmade Saibu, the Nakamura design knife, and you can see those are very, very similarly sized knives. You can see the Saibu a little bit longer, but in general, they, from a footprint perspective, those two very, very similar. And if you look at the thickness of those handles, and I've never seen anyone complain that the Saibu is too thick, you can see that the Bestech Freefall is a smidgen thicker, but not thicker that it's going to make a material difference for carry. And then to further prove my point, I brought out this knife that I eventually did a review on, and this is the Kaiser Apis. So first of all, let's lay them down here, and you know, I classify that as a gentleman's carry knife as well. So you can see those two, the Apis a little bit longer, but I want to show the thickness here. And I've EDC'd this knife as a sort of gentleman's carrier, sort of my dress knife for a long time, and I've never had an issue to get this in and out or my pocket and carry it comfortably. And you can see the thickness of those two knives. The Apis is just about identical in thickness. So, you know, just trying to prove my point there about the thickness of the and now let's get to the usual knives, and I have to say this, I always do, I just won't sleep well at night if I don't. I use this knife because it has been out for so long, and because I think so many people will be familiar with that knife, and that is the Benchmade Mini Barrage. A little bit longer, but again, generally maybe in the same sort of vicinity from an overall size perspective. But here again, let's look at the thickness of the handle on the Benchmade Mini Barrage, and in this case, the Mini Barrage is actually a little bit thicker than the Bestech Freefall. Right, so there we go, belaboring the point a little bit. Right, so what other knives do I normally use? So this is the Spyderco Manix 2, an altogether bigger knife, but again, just to give you a little bit of perspective on that as well. And the last one I'll use for size comparisons is this, and this is the Spyderco PM3, the smaller version, give you some sense of that, and you can see that this considerably shorter, and also the Spyderco taller in that dimension. Right, and there again, I mean, you know, looking at the thickness of these knives, yes, the Spyderco PM3 is a thinner knife, the Freefall a little bit thicker, but again, not massively thicker, not thick enough that it's going to make a material difference in your pocket. And again, I haven't heard anyone complain about the thickness of a PM3. So there we go. I will stop now. So there is something I have forgotten to do, and that's speak about the other versions of the knife. So let's quickly rattle through that before I summarize on this knife. So you get a version that has, so the scales, where this has the G10, has a red carbon fiber, and that carbon fiber a deep red, almost like a burgundy red, and that does look good, and that's got bronzed bolsters, and then the finish on that blade is gray and satin two-tone, or perhaps not two-tone, but two different finishes. So you've got the satin finish where this has the black, and then, no, sorry, you've got the satin finish in the same place, but the gray finish where this has the black. Then you get one with a black and green G10, also with the swirls, and that also looks good in combination with bronzed bolsters again in that case, and that also has the gray and satin finish on the blade. Then you get probably the least attractive, in my eye anyway, one where it's brown G10, and that also has the gray and satin blade finish. And then there's one that is quite different. So you get a titanium frame lock version. So on the non-show side, that would be your frame lock, all in titanium. And then on the show side on that knife, the bolster is a polished zirconium. And then the scale, where this is G10, has a natural micarta, and that also actually looks pretty good and quite different to the other versions of it. But I really do, of all of those options, I actually really do like this. I think this coloration, the combinations works in my eye very nicely with this design of knife. So to summarize the knife, yes, it has a little bit of weirdness. No, it is not going to be the perfect hard use EDC knife. I think this is a knife that if you're attracted by the look of it, the finish is pretty much bang on. You know, you can feel that joint. It's not an absolutely seamless joint there, but in general, the fit and finish on this knife, really good, nothing to complain about. I think it's a good looking knife, and I think it's unusual enough that it could find a place in the collection. It'll be one of those knives that I will buy, not as I said, as a hard use EDC. Maybe just on the occasion I will carry it for a little bit of light use, and then just that little bit of unusualness, you know, the little bit of fidget factor, the unusual shape. I think I'm glad, let me put it that way, I'm happy when things like this exist. So it doesn't exist to be the most practical EDC knife. It exists because it is a knife that you can use, but it exists because it's good looking and because it's unusual, and one wants that. One wants something different every now and again. Thank goodness not all knives are just designed and made to be ultimately practical. There we go. End of the sermon. Guys, I think that's that. I think I've covered off everything. All that's really left for me to do is to thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it, especially this time where you've shared a lot of your time with me, if you've stuck around this long. And I would equally appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so that you can be notified every time I release a new video, because I really would love you to join me more often. And let's just tilt that so you can maybe see the blade a little bit better before I sign off. There we go, one last look at the knife in all its glory, and then I'll leave it flat. And there it is, guys. Other than that, you go well, and God bless.